The flight attendant barely glanced at the man as he stepped onto the plane, his clothes worn and his shoes slightly scuffed. His presence didn't command attention, and to her he was just another economy-class passenger, not worth her time. She was used to dealing with businessmen in tailored suits, celebrities who expected nothing but the finest service, and high-class travelers who tipped generously. But this man? He looked like he had barely scraped enough money to afford the ticket. She sighed, rolling her eyes as he placed his carry-on into the overhead compartment with slow, deliberate movements. The other passengers bustled past, eager to find their seats, yet he seemed in no hurry. His hands, strong yet unassuming, adjusted the small bag carefully, as if he were used to treating things with care. She scoffed, probably his only valuable possession. As she made her way down the aisle, offering tight-lipped smiles to other guests, she spotted him settling into his seat. It was an aisle seat near the back, one of the least desirable spots on the plane. He didn't complain, didn't fidget, just sat quietly with his hands resting on his lap. She found his calm demeanor mildly irritating. Moments later, the flight was nearly full, and she stood near the front, greeting the last of the passengers boarding. Her expression immediately shifted when she noticed a particularly well-dressed businessman stepping onto the plane. He wore a sleek navy suit, a designer watch glinting under the cabin lights. Now this was the kind of passenger she liked to serve. She greeted him with an extra bright smile, her voice suddenly honeyed. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I help you with anything?" she purred. The businessman barely acknowledged her, offering only a brief nod before moving toward his seat in first class. But she didn't mind. The important ones didn't need to say much. Their presence was enough. As she turned back to face the economy class, her eyes landed on the man again. He was observing her, his expression unreadable. Something about his steady gaze unsettled her, but she quickly brushed it off. Once the flight took off, she began the usual routine, moving down the aisle to take drink orders. When she reached him, she barely spared him a glance. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, already prepared to move on before he could respond. "Just water, please," he said, his voice deep and composed. She turned away without another word, fetching a small plastic cup from the tray and handing it to him with an air of disinterest. He took it, his fingers lightly brushing hers. For a split second she felt something, an unexpected warmth, a steadiness, but she dismissed it. An hour into the flight, turbulence hit. The plane jolted slightly, nothing major, but enough to make some passengers uneasy. She moved through the cabin, reassuring those who looked worried, always making sure to give her best attention to those seated in first class. They were the ones who mattered most. Returning to the economy section, she noticed the man again. Unlike the others who had stiffened in their seats, clutching their armrests, he remained perfectly calm. He glanced out the window, then back to the people around him, as if assessing the situation rather than reacting to it. That same unreadable expression remained on his face. Then came the dinner service. She moved through the aisle, distributing meals. When she reached him, she held up 2 trays. "Chicken or pasta?" she asked flatly. He hesitated, then said, "Chicken." She handed him the tray with a bit more force than necessary, causing the drink on the tray to tip slightly, spilling a few drops onto his shirt. He barely reacted, just dabbed at the spot with a napkin. But she smirked. "Oops, sorry about that." He looked up at her, his eyes locking onto hers for a moment. There was no anger, no embarrassment, just something deep, assessing, as if he were studying her. That gaze made her stomach twist, but she quickly turned away, pretending she hadn't noticed. As she continued serving, she overheard 2 passengers in first class complaining about their drinks. She rushed over, immediately apologizing and offering them fresh glasses with an exaggerated show of concern. They laughed it off, one of them even giving her a playful wink. She smiled back, feeling validated. This was her world, the world of important people, where she wanted to belong. She didn't notice that the man in economy had been watching the entire interaction. Hours passed and the cabin dimmed as passengers settled in for the night. She took a break near the galley, chatting with another flight attendant about their upcoming layover. "I swear I don't know why we even allow some of these people on board," she muttered, shooting a glance toward the back of the plane. "Like that guy in 23C, probably scraped together his last pennies for this flight. Her colleague chuckled. Yeah, I saw him. Definitely not our usual crowd. She smirked, feeling smug, but her satisfaction was short-lived. As she returned to the cabin, she saw the man again, this time standing near the lavatories talking to a flight supervisor. The supervisor was nodding attentively, listening to him with an expression of respect. She frowned. Since when did they treat economy passengers with that level of attention? A few moments later, the supervisor made his way toward her. Can I have a word with you? He asked in a low voice. Her heart skipped a beat. Of course. The supervisor glanced toward the man in 23C before turning back to her. That passenger you served earlier? I need you to be a little more careful with how you treat him. She scoffed. Why? He's just another economy passenger. The supervisor's jaw tightened. That's where you're wrong. She blinked. What do you mean? The supervisor hesitated as if unsure how much to say. Then finally he muttered, let's just say he's not who he seems. A cold sensation crept up her spine. She turned her head slowly, looking toward the back of the cabin. The man was seated again, calm as ever. But now she felt something different, something unsettling. Who was he? The moment hung heavy in the air as the flight attendant stood frozen, her mind racing. Who was this man? The supervisor's words echoed in her head, unsettling her. A mere economy passenger shouldn't have this kind of presence, let alone command respect from her superiors. She forced herself to take a deep breath and shake off the feeling of unease. She continued with her duties, but her eyes kept drifting toward the man in 23C. He sat there with an air of quiet confidence, occasionally glancing out the window, seemingly undisturbed by the tension growing around him. Something about his demeanor unnerved her even more. Minutes turned into an hour, and as she walked past his seat again, she noticed that he had removed a sleek leather notebook from his bag. He scribbled something down with precise, deliberate strokes. She slowed her steps, curiosity gnawing at her. The pen he was using looked expensive, the kind she had only seen CEOs and executives carry. Her unease deepened. As she moved past, she overheard murmurs from the cockpit. The co-pilot had come out to speak with the flight supervisor, and they were talking in hushed voices. Words like inspection and protocol breach slipped through their guarded conversation. Something was definitely happening, and it involved him. The plane hit another patch of turbulence, shaking the cabin slightly. A nervous murmur rippled through the passengers, but he remained unfazed. Unlike the others who gripped their armrests, he simply turned another page in his notebook, as though turbulence was no more than a mild inconvenience. Unable to resist, she leaned into the galley and asked the supervisor, "Okay, you need to tell me who he is." The supervisor exhaled slowly. "I can't say much, but let's just say this flight is under a special evaluation." Evaluation? Her brow furrowed. By who? Him? You'll find out soon enough. Just be professional. And don't test your luck with him. Her stomach twisted. She felt a flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck. The way she had treated him earlier. It had been dismissive at best, borderline rude at worst. Had she made a mistake? As the flight continued, she noticed small changes. The first-class crew were suddenly more alert, their movements more precise. The pilots were communicating more frequently, checking in over the intercom. Something about the atmosphere had shifted. Then an announcement crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent shortly. Cabin crew, please prepare for landing." Her heart pounded as she went through the routine checks, but she couldn't stop glancing at him. He had closed his notebook and was now simply waiting, his fingers interlaced, as if he knew what was coming. As the plane touched down smoothly and taxied toward the gate, she saw a team of well-dressed individuals waiting outside. The instant the doors opened, they stepped inside. Airport executives, security personnel, and a few individuals in suits who carried an air of authority. One of them, an older man with salt and pepper hair, made his way directly to 23C. "Sir, welcome back." The executive greeted him warmly. "We're ready for your report." The flight attendant felt her breath catch in her throat. The man in 23C stood up, stretching slightly before giving a polite nod. "Thank you. The service had some interesting moments." He glanced toward her, his gaze unreadable. "I'll be sure to include them in my assessment." Assessment? Her knees almost buckled. She had spent the entire flight treating a high-ranking executive. No, more than that. As realization dawned, she remembered reading an article about the owner of the airline conducting surprise inspections in disguise. This wasn't just an executive. He was the owner of the airline. Panic surged through her. Her mind replayed every interaction, the dismissive attitude, the spilled drink, the way she had belittled him. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She had made the worst mistake of her career. The passengers began disembarking, and she stood frozen, unable to move as he slowly approached. He stopped just inches from her, his expression unreadable. "I believe you have potential," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But potential means nothing if it's wasted on arrogance." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I suggest you reflect on that." Then, without another word, he stepped past her, shaking hands with other crew members as he made his way out. She remained rooted in place, her heart hammering. She had spent years believing that her worth was tied to how well she could impress first-class passengers, how much she could cater to those who seemed important. And yet, in a single flight, she had insulted the most important person of all. As she stood there processing everything, the supervisor approached. He gave her a knowing look. "Next time, don't judge a passenger by their seat number." She swallowed hard and nodded. She took a deep breath, watching as the airport executives followed the airline owner toward a private lounge. She could feel the weight of the lesson pressing down on her. Her career wasn't over, but she knew she had a long way to go improving herself. As she turned back to the emptying plane, she made a silent vow to herself. She would never underestimate a passenger again. The airline owner had given her a chance to learn. Next time, she would be ready. The airport lights shone brightly outside, illuminating the tarmac where the private jet of the airline owner was parked, waiting. He turned back for just a brief moment, his eyes locking onto hers through the window. A small, knowing smile flickered across his lips before he disappeared into the terminal. And just like that, he was gone. But the impact he left on her would stay forever. She stood by the aircraft door a little longer, her mind replaying everything. She now understood that true professionalism wasn't about impressing the elite, it was about treating everyone with respect. She had learned it the hard way, but at least she had learned. As she walked back into the aircraft, she made a quiet resolution. Next time, she would get it right.